Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the opening of our symposium Ferments, part 2. I hope you're all doing well. Did you get yourself something to drink? Are you doing fine? I got myself some water kefir, obviously. Okay, so yeah, our first part with Pia was a bit technical, and now we're happy to dive more into the philosophical, metaphorical aspects of fermentation. So it's going to be very fun. And for that, we have two great speakers, Markus Shimizu, who is also one of the curators of this whole program. Thank you, Markus. And also Shih, who was already a speaker last year at our digital symposium. So it's a pleasure to have you back and yeah, to spend the evening with you. So yeah, let's dive straight in, and maybe both of you want to introduce yourself a bit longer than what I just did, and also so tell us who you are and also what you ferment, because that's always exciting. Rich, you want to go ahead?
Sure. My name is Shih. I would say that in general, I'm a culinary adventurer, somebody who's very interested in eating and cooking, as well as understanding flavors and textures. I've been on, sort of this fermentation journey for, on the order of several years now. And it just came upon me in terms of, actually doing it myself, having met people who are excited about fermentation and wanting to build a little bit more in terms of flavor. I have always enjoyed ferments throughout my life. My parents are Taiwanese, so we always had pickles and all sorts of, sort of fermented meats or different types of foods that were held in preservation for a long period of time that added flavor. And it's not that my mom knew, how to make them. She just would go to the store and pick up certain items, for example, like like a black bean paste, and that would be part, put into our rice, and, mustard pickles. So early on, I just had this palate for having this sort of adventure at home, as well as, outside those doors with, just in general American cuisine, which is, more focused on, processed food and at the time. And, and so I had this sort of like, interesting like back and forth of understanding, so that, sort of developed my palate to, be adventurous and not afraid of eating anything really. And then, and fairly recently, I wrote a book with my friend Jeremy Mansky on the subject of koji and the possibilities. It was released just after the pandemic hit, so it was an interesting time, but it was really nice because a lot of the people who are cooks and chefs in the kitchen don't necessarily have time to pay attention in terms of, the diligence and dedication of cooking food, that they actually, sort of fortunately in an unfortunate situation had the time to sit down and digest this information. And it's sort of blown up in terms of people being excited and influenced by, all of fermentation in general. So yeah, I just really love food, and I love sharing and want more people to learn about it and understand it, because, fermentation, as we all know, is the reason why we're here. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Markus, you want to follow?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of similar to Rich in the sense that I grew up with all these ferments. I'm half Japanese, so we had a lot of soy sauce, miso, and all these kinds always of food. But I actually studied art, and I was not necessarily wanting to do a business with miso or fermentation. But I think like one part, like some health aspects brought me to fermentation, and also the desire maybe, or the creativity that I brought, and liking to do like creative experiments and trying things out yourself, like DIY style. This brought me to fermentation, and already quite a while back, actually, like maybe 15 years ago, I started fermentation, and yeah, it's always very interesting to do new experiments. Yeah, but at the moment, actually, I'm having like a little shop that we are making mainly Japanese ferments like soy sauce, miso, and other koji products, and still also doing a lot of creative stuff. But we also have our regular products that we have kind of always our standard products, and yeah, it's quite how do you call it? Challenging at times because I'm not an entrepreneur or like an entrepreneur, more like maybe from this artist background, and it's always new stuff, even like besides the fermentation that you have to take care of, and yeah, it's fun.
And your shop or your production is called mimiferments, right?
Yeah.
I think you didn't say that. And it's in Berlin.
Yeah, it's in Berlin. We're in Moabit at the moment, and we are about to change to a new place, larger place, and that's keeping me busy quite a bit also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks to both of you. So I want to start our conversation with a quote that I found really telling when I first read it. It's a quote by David Zilber. I'm sure we all know who that person is, but he used to be the director of the NOMA fermentation lab. And in an interview, he said, I quote, "Food is culture, but fermentation is culture on a deeper level. Culture and culture mean two different things to a biologist and an anthropologist, but in fermentation, they overlap completely." And I think that's a really fascinating analogy, and that's the direction we want to go into tonight. So, and in the same way, we've increasingly seen like fermentation described as a metaphor, like in that book by Sander Katz, which I have here. Maybe some of you know it. So let's start with the biggest picture. And I'm turning to you, Markus, because in our preparation, you talked about the earth as a ferment. So let's start with that. Maybe can you tell us a bit more about why you would describe the earth as a ferment?
Yeah, this comes maybe from my artist background. You think in concepts and principles, and I like to kind of apply one principle to other things. And one principle of fermentation, in my view, is like metabolism. It's basically digesting stuff and transforming matter. And I think that's what's happening to Earth, basically by all these microorganisms, but also like the whole like ecology, fauna and flora. And on top of it, it comes in a vessel. So usually like ferments are in a vessel, like miso is in a vat, like a barrel, or it has a shape. So Earth is a vessel for these organisms that are transforming Earth. And during my workshops, when I try to introduce people to fermentations, I always tell them to kind of what is like as a fermentator. It's important to kind of set the basic principles or the environmental conditions of the ferment according to what you're doing and with what microbes you're working. So, for example, if you have a ferment, you maybe set the salt parameter, like how much salt you use or no salt, or if it's a fermentation with air or without air, or the water content and all these kind of parameters. And with this, you kind of steer where the ferment is going. And this basically sets the habitat of these microorganisms. And Earth is also the habitat of this, like all these microorganisms. And we are constantly kind of transforming and shaping the world, the planet, basically. And I see this kind of analogy in fermentation and the earth.
Mm-hmm. You could say that everything is fermentation.
Yeah.
No. And so scaling down a little bit to us humans and the microorganisms, there's a lot to be said, I think, about that relationship. Rich, do you want to share some thoughts? How would you describe?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with, you know, organisms in general need nutrition to be able to grow and flourish. And we all have, you know, these basic components that we need to survive. And there are different levels of, you know, development of different organisms and the ways that they are able to, you know, per se digest nutrition. And one of the things that, you know, is sort of essential to digesting nutrition is you know, these microorganisms, as well as, you know, the enzymes that are created. And if you think about this, the enzymes that are created by microorganisms and ourselves, they're very similar in terms of being able to create nutrition. What's really beautiful about, you know, koji specifically, or, you know, filamentous mold based, you know, microorganisms in the arena of fermentation, is that they create these enzymes such that they can break proteins down into amino acids and starches into sugars. And these are the things that we desire. So in terms of our ability to have this, you know, sort of a symbiosis, it's pretty amazing because they essentially are pre-digesting food for us. So that's one of the most amazing things about fermentation, is that, you know, we look at a rotting piece of fruit and we have sort of this fear of what's to be. But, you know, long ago, people discovered that, you know, if it sits in a specific, you know, environment, we keep it anaerobic, it creates alcohol and it preserves itself. And there are all these, you know, sort of, you know, microbial behaviors that we veer in directions with, you know, as Marcus was saying, you know, whether we talk about, you know, limiting the air, or we add salt, or we add acidity, or the microbes themselves create acidity. It's the sort of microcosm of creation of nutrition that we have figured out, you know, essentially through, you know, trial and error. And, you know, obviously, you know, people who were able to discover ferments that work for them survive, and those who didn't. So these are the types of things that I often think about, is like, you know, when you have these very basic understandings of fermentation, they're universal because they all have to not make us sick, right? And it's very simple in the ways that it happens, because, you know, back in the time of, you know, very few resources, it's not like you had running water to be able to clean everything to the nth degree. And it's not like you had a plentiful amount of water. So you had to use what was available to you to make the nutrition. And by chance, you know, in terms of what we built through agriculture, it was based on wild foods of the area. So once we nurtured these sorts of relationships, the microbes were already there, you know, gaining nutrition from them. We just figured out how to point it in a direction with understanding that we had, you know, virtually from almost, you know, trial and error and what was available. You know, if you can imagine, if you had an excess of something, we didn't have refrigeration, or, you know, the only method of freezing things was if you're in the right, you know, right climate. So we had to find out ways to be able to hold our food longer, because there, you know, with the seasonal changes, or, you know, just rotting in general, that was not servicing us. We had to find a way to hold this food without technology. And the technology was microbes and what was available around you. And that to me is sort of culturing culture, right? Because each culture develops based on a specific, you know, area, a specific region, and it all had, you know, very specific things of that were not available elsewhere. I mean, today we can get anything we want wherever it is. You know, we have the resources to be able to do that, you know, for most of us. But that's the thing to think about is like, we're all trying to gain nutrition, and ultimately we're sort of, I think we want to talk about symbiosis, but it's also, we are sort of taking advantage of these microbes, or maybe they're taking advantage of us, right? If you think about it in the context of allowing certain types of microbes to continue to survive, right? People are very specific about which lactobacillus they use for a specific yogurt for production, or whatever aspergillus oryzae for koji for making miso and sake. There are all these things, or yeast for this very specific beer, right? People are breeding these such that they'll continue to survive for, ultimately, like what we desire for flavor and pleasure. But before, it was a matter of, hey, like, I don't want to die. And the reason why things are delicious is because they're nutritious, right? That's the tie, right? It's not because, it's functional. Like, it's not because, if it was back in the day and something tasted horrible, but it was good for us, like, we'd be in a completely different conversation right now. But because things are delicious and nutritious and they're tied together, that's what we learn to do to create these situations. And that's what the microbes need to do to create the nutrition. But I mean, the other side of the coin is we can talk about how industry has totally flipped the coin on creating delicious things that are not nutritious at all, right? And that just create addiction. So
yeah, let's speak about that in a minute, and maybe also about industrial fermentation. We will come back to that. But I think it's also super interesting to look at fermentation and its relationship to place, because like mostly for example, in cheese making, you have some yeast and some fungi that are present naturally, and they, like these microorganisms that are there, started to process the milk in different types of cheeses, kind of. So that's how you have this like huge diversity of different cheeses. And then cultural practices that emerge from that. And I think that's a really great example of how it's intertwined, and how, place creates fermentation, creates culture and another type of culture.
Absolutely.
And I read that in some places in France, for example, some of the original microorganisms, for example, of camembert, are not present anymore in the area because of monocultures and lack of diversity. But that's another topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we talked a bit about the kind of historical background and why fermentation was born as a necessity. And moving to today, where would you see your role, both of you, in that long process of co-creation of fermentation history? Sorry, that was a very long question, but you understand what I mean. Markus, you want to go first?
Maybe I wanted to still add something to the prior question, like this relationship between microorganisms and humans. Kind of using the similar analogy that I had with the planet as a ferment, I see maybe also the human body itself as a ferment. Maybe most of our viewers here, or participants, know about the microbiome and these trillions of microorganisms that live on our body, and that this microbiome is also very specific or very different, like what type of microorganisms live in specific places. So we have basically different type of habitats, like wetlands or dry areas or forests or these kind of things, depending on which body part they live in or on. And in this sense, basically we have different like ecologies on our Earth. So and we are a habitat for a lot of microorganisms, and in that sense, maybe are like a planet for those microorganisms. And there's a very intimate relationship with these microorganisms. Just to name one thing, even like just something like conception, so giving birth, is only possible because of having lactobacilli in the vagina, which create a pH, like lower pH, which keeps other bacteria away, and so keeps it kind of hygienic. And maybe like what is kind of like fairly recent in human history, that we figured out that actually like our human activity on the planet Earth has some kind of footprint. So we have maybe CO2 and deforestation and these kind of things, and that have kind of an effect on the fauna and everything. Our behavior and our way of maybe feeding ourselves and how we live has an effect on our microorganisms. And there's also like this parallel thing. So maybe when you eat or what you do, you could consider all your habitants on your body, what you do, and if you would want to do that to them. So maybe if you, I mean, you can obviously have a Coke and all these processed foods, but is it really something you wish your bacteria to be fed with? Because you're basically really like not just one individual, this human thing that appears on the screen here, but you're all these other things involved, and there are like really trillions of these organisms. And yeah, maybe you should become aware of that also a bit.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful way of thinking of us. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, otherwise, role as fermenter. So how I see myself maybe as a fermenter, in some sense, maybe making people aware of these kind of things, for example, that I talked about. But me as being half Japanese, half German, living in Germany, and having this little shop where I basically explain a lot of things each day over and over to clients. I see myself maybe as an ambassador for certain minority fermented foods from Japan, and making them available here and known to the public in very short.
For me, my role as a fermenter, I feel like as a cook and a lover of food, fermentation is the easiest way to yield a delicious product in your own home with very little work. As long as, you know, obviously get the best ingredients that are afforded to you. But that's the one thing that I found is you can make something as delicious as something you would get in a fine dining restaurant for very little cost. And it, you know, fermentation is about food accessibility. And I want to people all over the world to eat. If we think about how much food waste there is in the world, I mean, there's a statistic here in the US that people throw away like 50% of fresh food. What if people had the power or the understanding, the basic understanding of ferment food? A lot of that would go away. And, you know, how much does it cost to run your refrigerator? How many things are in there that you haven't eaten over months, or maybe even in your freezer for a year? Like, these are things that, you know, I have, like right here, I have this peanut butter miso that I made in 2015. And it's just getting better every day. Like, these are the types of things that you think about, that fermentation in some cases can keep food indefinitely. I mean, there are places all over the world where they have a constant fermentation pot where they keep putting vegetables in, or, you know, in the tradition of, you know, Japanese miso making, they take a mother from a previous batch to like help feed it that, you know, sort of microcosm of things going on. It's about food accessibility. It's about simplicity of being able to make food accessible. And we're just taking notes from our ancestors who allowed us to be here today. I mean, they did something as simple as putting, you know, mashing up some vegetables with a little bit of salt and putting it in a pot, or leaving something out, like, you know, for discovery, right? You know, you can imagine, you know, having rice grains that you just left out cooked because you couldn't hold them and you weren't sure what to do. And I have some Shio koji here, and like I put some, you know, I put some of my friends' cilantro seeds in it, because I wanted to see what flavor would happen. But as you can see, I didn't mix it for a little bit and it's growing mold on top. And that's the mold that's part of it. This is happening naturally. I mean, I did seed it originally to make the koji, but it just wants to live. And these things are naturally occurring. We just are veering them. And I want for people to understand like the basics of, you know, how you can make a specific ferment, right? Each ferment that we know of in a specific culture has, you know, very specific instructions how to make it. And you have to follow specific instructions to yield that very same product. And it's a part of a standardization. But understand that particular product came of happenstance, or, you know, accessibility of whatever was available to the people at the time. And it just happened based on, you know, these manipulations. But if you think about what could happen with whatever you have to follow that same process, you yourself can make something super delicious that's of your area, of your personality, of who you are, of what you like, that you can make and say that this is mine. I have ownership and I made this. And it's as simple as following a simple procedure and mixing some things together and waiting. And that is what I would like for more people to understand, is that fermentation is not that hard. It's super simple. And all you have to do is take a little bit and put it on some bread or some prepared grains, and you have a meal. Like, you have a nourishing meal that's bioavailable, like all of these things that people advertise as their taglines, organic, you know, probiotic, like all these things. Ferments have all of it. So what are we doing, like having somebody in a factory manufacture pills that have these things in it? It's silly. I mean, it's all of industry and power, right? But what if we could have that and bring that back to the people, and we have like food sovereignty? Like, how would that change the world? Like, wouldn't our quality of life be better? That's what I want. I want people to be more aware of what they're putting in their bodies. Do we want that from somebody of industry who cares about profit over people? Or do you want to care for yourself? I mean, food is something that you put into your body knowingly, and you have the power to understand what's in it. Like, fermentation gives you a lens into like how fresh your food is, and how do you keep your food without refrigeration, like, and use as little energy as possible, and leverage the beautiful microbes that are around us everywhere. And that's what I want to encourage, is just for people to be empowered to eat the food that they can make on their own, and appreciate it for what it is, and that it's not that hard to do.
Yeah, for the most part, it is like, yeah, very low tech and low energy. I see some claps, and also a hand of Federica.
Yeah, I just wanted just two things that came into my mind on your comment. One, I thought about myself, why I'm not doing it more often, and I think what the things that are around, like lots of the conversations that I'm hearing, I mean, of course, I do talk a lot to chefs, but I think the things that they created now, and all the experiments and all the, you know, I don't know, also different fermentations that spread now all over the world. For me, as like a consumer then in the end, and not a chef, I think what it did to me is also make it a little bit intimidating to a certain degree. And, you know, yeah, maybe I can make a sauerkraut, but then I would already be like, if I hear koji, I'm already like, oh God, I'd rather buy it from Markus. And then the second thing that I wanted to say to your comment, I think it definitely has something to do with the lifestyle that we live also right now, that is fast paced. Everyone is super busy. but also with people, if we really talk about food security, is that the right word now? Is it food security?
That's what they're saying these days.
Yeah, so if you, no, but security is about being safe for consumption. The other, I mean,
okay, yeah.
having enough access to.
Yeah, safety
food.
then.
Is also, you know, if I am a family maybe with 4 children, it needs to be a priority then to make the food ourselves. And I think that's not just for fermentation, but for eating healthy food right now in general, is that it is the easier way to go to convenience foods, and it is not a priority, or not the time and the money is not there to, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's situation is different, and I think what I'm trying to say is for people to just try things and see what happens. I mean, I'm not asking everybody to, like, you know, shut off their refrigerators and see what happens. But what I'm saying is start to introduce yourself to, like, how do you simply make something that's fermented, and you'll have an appreciation for, you know, like, you know, what it is, and understanding more about your food. And I think, you know, having a level of just basic knowledge of things. And yes, like, we all live a fast-paced lifestyle. I, like, in terms of, like, wanting to develop, you know, sort of mentally, right? That's sort of what industry has done, is, like, it's allowed us to free up our time to not produce food and make food, right? And to grow in different ways. But all I'm saying is that you have a level of understanding and control that you can make some things and start there. I mean, you know, you don't have to go crazy. It's just a matter of, you know, baby steps, right? And, you know, when you have baby steps, then there are people who have more awareness. Then, you know, maybe what you find is somebody locally, right, through this medium, like through talking to people that who are making these beautiful things that you don't necessarily have to make, but now you can support them. You can support more fermenters like Markus, so he doesn't have to worry about, like, what he's educating people on versus, like, just selling delicious things, right? Because what awareness builds is, like, I now know what Markus makes, and I know how it's made, and I know that he cares about me. I know that the, you know, industrial, like, cereal producer that's putting tons of sugar in these boxes, like, does not care about me. But I'm going to make the choice to buy things from people like Markus. That's what I'm trying to say, is, like, you know, it's like, it's near impossible to have everybody just say, oh, I want to start fermenting or cooking, because many people don't care to do these things. And we're sort of on, you know, we're sort of these weirdos, right? We want to cook, we want to spend this time, like, you know, getting more people to cook and understand their food. But there's, like, reasonability of communication and what people's priorities are. But if people cared more about, you know, folks who are, you know, making food through their heart because they care and they want to make it delicious, and not because they want to make a profit, like, it starts to help the conversation and starts to sort of veer things in a better direction.
Yes.
Frida, you want to add something, or?
Yeah, but I don't. I'm trying to hold myself back a little bit. No, but I had another thing that I just thought when I looked at Annette, actually. Because also teaching chefs more about fermentation, I think it's definitely a part of the school. But I'm not sure how far it goes. And I think it has a lot of things that are useful if you want to cook maybe with more fresh vegetables and with more fresh foods that are also maybe seasonal. I think then you always need to know your things with fermentation in order, you know, here in Berlin, you have to ferment things that you can then use in winter. That was just one of my things that I just thought about. Sorry, but it's a little bit apart from the conversation also. I just wanted to connect the thoughts a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe Annette, if she wants to, maybe Annette, you can add something later, or
yeah. But
yeah.
it's just like the fermentation, there is a link between the farmer and the chef then, and a link to seasonality, a link to maybe more nature and fresh foods.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those should obviously be celebrated as much as they can, but farmers grow way too much for us to consume by design, right? It has to.
Actually, maybe one, so seasonality and regionality or something brought me to this idea now. Actually, like making your own ferments, so touching your food with your hands and then making, like, I don't know, sauerkraut or whatever, is somehow also regional in the sense that you inoculate your ferment with your microbiome, and it's like it's said that, like, similar to like maybe eating seasonal and regional, which is maybe healthy because it's like this food is seasonal and fresh and also maybe adapted to the climate around your neighborhood. Inoculating your ferments or your food with your own healthy microbiome, I assume, you kind of augment the ferment, and then it's kind of adapted, especially good for you. And this is some kind of maybe also eating local aspect, maybe a little bit different, but this triggered my response at the moment now.
Yeah, and speaking about our relationship with nature, I read something interesting in the book by Sander Katz. He was talking about kind of two ways of seeing nature and the microorganisms that surround us. There's the kind of Pasteurian way to see it, of nature as something that needs to be tamed, and this obsession with purity and cleanliness and eradicating all the microbes surrounding us. And then this kind of post or like pre-Pasteurian way of seeing our environment and the microbes in it as our allies in life and in food production. Is that something you think about too?
Definitely. It's actually really funny because like miso and soy sauce production in Japan is actually like quite dirty. So a bit, sake is better. It's quite clean. But especially miso and sake, if you go like to a traditional manufacturer there, it's really like overwhelming, like with the flora in the in the space itself. And I always imagine if like somebody from Germany or Europe, maybe like a health inspectionist comes, they would just scream and run away or so, because it's really just teeming with microorganisms and nothing is really cleaned. It's really like the barrels, they look like a croissant or something, like as if moss is growing on it, and even also the walls and like the wood beams, they are really covered with everything, and it's you're even not allowed to clean there, basically. So it's a very different concept, and the different concept being basically there, this fauna, like the space is protected with a protective flora. So there are organisms there that occupy the space and don't leave any room for any newcomer, basically, and keep them away. And since these manufacturers are usually like existing for several hundred years, it's empirically kind of, or statistically or so, proven that this works. And like the concept here, like you mentioned with Pasteur and maybe very hygienic conditions, I'm using stainless stuff that you disinfect. I like to kind of compare it with maybe a field that you plow and that there's nothing on it, no plants, and basically there everything has a chance to grow initially, at least. And then this maybe Japanese way or this protective flora concept is more like a forest. And in a forest, actually, very little things have chance to grow because it's already dominated by other plants and there's very little light and there's already a lot of competition with nutrients and there are symbiosis going on. So it helps to kind of keep bad stuff away. And yeah, that's yeah, maybe these two different concepts.
Yeah,
I mean, in terms of what you're saying, I just thought, like, what if we as humans were in like a hospital environment all the time versus able to do whatever it is that we do and be free, and in the dirty environment, you know, what would happen then? I mean, I think we would not be so feeling so good.
Yeah, and also like a hyper clean environment, it can create more resistance or like more resistant kind of bad microbes, and yeah, because there's less of a protective mechanism. So yeah, interesting. So moving back a bit to our role in all of this, Rich, you often use the hashtag Koji Builds Community. Do you want to talk a bit more about that and the place of collaboration in fermentation?
Yeah, I mean, I started the hashtag just through, you know, I was going to California, LA area, and I just wanted to have a place for people to go to see what we were doing, and it caught on because people were really excited about it. I see it as, you know, we're all trying to learn about koji and fermentation in general, or just overall flavor and making food and enjoying food. And for us, you know, as people who are excited about it to share with others, it's a beautiful thing. Because I remember when I was first, you know, trying to figure out how to cook something or how to make something, and I would read all these books. I would, like, you know, get on the internet and look up things and try to understand more about it and watch videos. But one of the things that really rung true to me was once I posted something for somebody to see, there was a relationship there to say, hey, like, maybe you should try this, or that's a great idea, I love it, or even, you know, you're doing something wrong and I want to help you. And having these touch points of communication and seeds of ideas helps for people to build these, you know, nurturing relationships, so we can all help each other develop and understand more about whatever subject it is that you love. And I mean, I would say that, you know, being able to post on this particular hashtag with all of these people, it's been very nurturing. I mean, it's the reason why we ended up writing a book and we had all the participants in the book, is that these people helped nurture us all to become better at fermentation, understanding koji, and just in general sharing ideas. I mean, I've built so many friendships and relationships just through sharing ideas on how to make something. And if it I mean, it just happens that koji is sort of this topic that's very exciting and will continue to be. But it's a matter of this, like, I just want for more people to share and more people to help each other. And it's just a vehicle for a touch point through, you know, this digital medium that we all connect. And then ultimately you can connect with the people physically. And then it's this cool interaction. It's like, hey, like, one of my favorite things to do is to take ferments that I've made and share them with people, and especially people who are also fermenters. It's like this cool exchange where you start to taste them, you understand what somebody's working on, and you say, hey, like, I did it this way. Or somebody would come up with this idea that you wish you had thought of. Like, those are the seeds that sort of plant in your brain that are like, oh, because I only have this level, like, your perspective is only so much, right? But if you can harness everybody else's perspective in you know, sort of a similar direction, similar interests, then you can create something really powerful that you all learn from. You all, like, start to, you know, share this growth. And it's amazing because you know, I never would have thought that people would be so interested that you know, we would be connected in this way, that you would invite me to speak, you know, all the way in, you know, Berlin. Like, if I was like just doing this, you know, and not communicating through this medium or connecting, we would have never talked. We would not be communicating with all these people. Marcus, like, I wouldn't know who Marcus is. Like, I wouldn't know who you guys are. Like,
Yeah.
we have seeded this change and this influence because we care and we want people to know more about their food and feel good about it, and have it, you know, have more excitement and like understanding, and you know, break bread together. Like, that's how these relationships start. It's like, you know, what do you need from me to understand more about how you can have a better life? And if it starts with something as simple as a mold grown on a grain that makes something delicious, like, I don't care.
Mm.
Like, take it wherever you want to take it. If it's as simple as like you want to just make some sake, and you know, you can read a book to understand more and I can point you in the right direction, that's great. But if you take something away from it that says, hey, I discovered something more about my life because I've talked to people and this is what I want to do more of, like, and it's brought you to your passion, your love, like, that's what happened to me. I didn't, you know, I don't know, if you talked to me like 10 years ago, if you told me I would be here, it would be very strange for me. I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I knew I loved food, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to be a chef. But, you know, people encouraged me in a different way and understood like that I could make delicious things. And that didn't that didn't need to be a chef. That didn't need to be anything. It could be something completely different, but it's up to you to figure that out. But there are all these people, when you start sharing the things you're working on, you're interested in, and you're curious about. If you ask a question to somebody who's really into what you're already doing at a much higher level, and you just ask them genuinely, most people would say, yes, of course, I will help you. And that's what happened with Koji Bill's community and where it is today.
Yeah. Markus, you want to say maybe a few things about the fermentation community in Berlin and how you have seen it evolve, or yeah, what's your impression of it?
A bit overwhelmed. I mean, there are certain maybe people that ferment and on professional level and private level, and chefs, and there's generally, like, I'm always very surprised that there are so many people interested in fermentation workshops. So there's a great demand. Otherwise, it's not that we meet regularly or there's like this buzzing community or so that I'm part of, at least. and I think maybe it's more international, and maybe like through the social medias and these kind of things, there's a lot of things going on. And then I think there's a lot of chefs that are interested also, like in trying out fermentation and actually doing that. Maybe not as like a tight-knit community that you really kind of meet up regularly or so. That's at least my impression of it.
Yeah. And staying with you, Markus, you studied arts before, so I wanted to ask you, what's your take on fermentation and creativity, and how you would compare your work as a fermenter and as an artist?
Yeah, so actually now I'm not really doing any art anymore because I'm really just too busy fermenting, but there are, yes, a lot of like similarities. And maybe art is a lot about maybe like discovering things or revealing and making visible things or making aware of things. And when I ferment, it's always very delightful. I'm very delighted and very happy to discover new like facets of ingredients. So we experiment quite a lot, and I mean, even like with very traditional or common things, like if you make, like, for example, barley koji or so, it smells like apple juice, or but then also maybe more exciting or funny things, sweet potato miso can taste like a very industrial orange juice, and these kind of things, or hemp seed miso, like egg yolk, and these kind of things make you kind of aware that there are a lot of hidden layers to your ingredients, and just maybe trying out and also figuring out ways to ferment things that are maybe is like I'm fermenting mostly with koji, and that is usually on grains or legumes, but how to adapt the same process like to other things than that, and yeah, to maybe flour, or to whatever, like basically substrate or aggregate, so it's like maybe solid or liquid, or powdery or oily, or these kind of things, and then figuring out ways how to do that. And that's a lot of creativity in a sense. And on top of that, maybe with recipes, I try to have like some concept. So in art also, a lot of it is concept, and then every part of the art basically also needs to have like a reason. So why is this there? I mean, this is what maybe during my art studies, if you made a nice artwork or something, then people would really tear it apart and say, well, this doesn't make any sense, and why did you put this there? And so this made me aware of maybe thinking about like also in some sense the recipe, but also the presentation of the final product itself kind of makes sense, and all parts are essential to it, and there's basically nothing that like weak point in some sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So we also want to open the conversation to everybody in a minute. So if you have any questions, you can already think of them. But yeah, I have a few last things I would like to know from you. First is, so we addressed this issue of food waste. And beyond that, do you think fermentation can actually help us to solve some real issues of our current food system? Can it be something useful? Does somebody wants to go first? Markus, maybe, or?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, for example, just at the moment, for example, we are using bread from some bakeries that, I mean, every bakery, we are actually making bread misos and bread shiokoji stuff from old bread from 3 different bakeries at the moment, for example, that would otherwise probably just go to waste, or maybe could also be donated as, or we're using vegetables that are like oversized or too small, or like crooked in some shape and are not sellable. And we just made, for example, like a chili shiokoji with that, with pepperonis that had like some discoloring, very minor. Or we teach also, like I do quite a lot of workshops with chefs, how to use like their food scraps and in the kitchen, because especially maybe in like a lot of these Michelin-starred restaurants, there's a lot of food waste, and you can still make them available, so you can make a garum out of it. We also actually picked up lots of fish from restaurants and made garums out of that, because they maybe just use the prime fillet part and the rest they kind of use, or often like egg whites are like too abundant, So you can make a like egg white shoyu or so. So there are many ways that you can improve like the amount of the usage of food, be it like because of the shape and discoloring, or because it's a day old and not sellable like bread, or because it's not the prime part, or because of the recipes. Like also restaurants a lot have something on the menu, and then they have a lot of like I don't know, maybe they only use the chicken breast but not the legs or the wings. And then we also made like or we're still making the like a chicken garum thing, and very common. Yeah.
Rich, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a tool, right? I mean, it's a tool that, you know, in ancient times were used such that we would use everything. I mean, we're in a different age where, you know, we want to just be able to get certain parts or have a certain understanding of food. But I think it's just a matter of understanding what that toolbox can be, because these things that we're talking about in terms of what people normally waste today would never be wasted in the past, because it was all good food and nutritious, and it was preserved in a way, whether it was fermented or not, you know, salted, dried, smoked. All these techniques existed previously. So, you know, everything that everybody's doing today had been done before in different ways. And I think it's just looking back to what those techniques are and adapting them as everybody has been. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we're circling back. But again, it's nothing new and it's nothing hard.
Yeah, I think it can also help us like restore a bit of agency and understanding of food and how it's made. Yeah, and a sense of closeness to what we consume.
Yeah, I mean, most people aren't, you know, are very squeamish about, you know, understanding that an animal was killed, or even seeing that an animal was killed to eat food, and we're very disconnected from that.
Yeah.
Some people don't even know, you know, what broccoli looks like, that it actually has leaves. I mean, there are these things that we're disconnected to, and you know, a lot of things in life we're disconnected from, and that's part of, you know, where we are, and that's fine. But when you think about, you know, lives that are lost because you have to eat food, then I think there's a little bit more respect in what ends up in the bin.
Yeah. All right, so moving to my last question. It's more specific. It's about koji, because that's what both of you specialize in. And we will have a full day tomorrow where we're going to hear more about koji and also apply and do all kinds of things. But since we won't have Rich with us tomorrow, yeah, maybe you can tell us quickly what's the appeal of koji to you? Why is it so interesting?
I think koji to me is essentially, you know, this universal tool that can make any ferment you want and anything delicious through the vehicle of fermentation. It has, you know, the precursor enzymes, which are critical in terms of maximizing flavor, that don't really exist, you know, at that magnitude in other preparations. And then from using the precursor to create sugars, then you can pretty much take that to any fermentation process. So literally you can ferment any food better with koji. I mean, arguably there are limitations, but it really gives you this toolbox of things that you can do right off the bat, because you can make a super delicious steak with the toughest cut and not even know how to cook. I mean, you've all experienced it, right? We all have a bottle of soy sauce in our cabinets, right? And we all like just douse it in a marinade, and it changes it completely. And if you think about what the components of that were to begin with before you ultimately became soy sauce, it's just soybeans, cracked wheat, salt, and water. Think about what process would you follow to cook that to make it as delicious as soy sauce? It's impossible. And that is just scratching the like surface of what you can do to any food. I mean, if you can make like soybeans taste that delicious, think about adding that to anything you enjoy, like just a little bit. And that's the key, right? The key is like that little bit of umami or that little bit of sugar changes everything. Like when you have some not so great, berries that you got from the store and you put a tiny bit of sugar on it and you just set it on the counter for a few hours, does that not make it better? That's all we're doing with koji. But with koji, you're actually using the vehicle of the enzymes and the microbes to make that food taste better than itself. Not to say that you shouldn't appreciate food at its peak, but how many opportunities in time do you actually have that specific moment where it's at its ultimate peak? It's rare, right? It's fleeting. I mean, people go nuts over, when berries are in season or when tomatoes are in season, but most of the year they aren't, right? Or you have to use, you have to sort of manipulate them in a way through cooking and preparation to make them taste better. And I always use it as an analogy is it's as universal as salting something to make it more delicious, but you're just adding a touch of umami, right? A touch of sugar.
Yeah. Markus, do you want to add anything briefly? You're still on mute.
So my appeal with koji is that it's so universal, so you can use it really on anything. There's really no limit to it, basically. Anything organic will ferment and maybe you get moldy, so you can get it moldy with koji. And the aspect that it reveals so many new different aspects of that thing also is so rewarding, and it's a lot of fun working with it, and you can make so many things so tasty and more healthy and like more accessible, all the nutrients. We'll maybe talk more about it tomorrow, but it's just, yeah, there's like no limit, and it's maybe just your creativity that impedes you from fermenting maybe something difficult, but everything is possible. And also, even if it's maybe difficult to ferment a raw egg with koji or so, there are always ways to somehow apply koji to it. So if it's difficult for you to ferment raw eggs or cooked eggs or whatever, you can always add koji. You can always mix it with some koji rice. So there's, and on top of it, also you can always combine it with a lot of different types of fermentation or food, like how do you call it in English? Like improvements. So you can add, you can combine smoking and kojification. You can also I sometimes get like some pastrami from a chef that I kojify, or some sausages that are heavily like seasoned and with chili and garlic and salt and whatever, but doesn't impede koji. So you can still grow it on it, and it's very, very versatile, and that makes it like very universal and like so endless with the possibilities.
Thank you. Does anybody have some questions? Otherwise, we will wrap this up. Femi, yeah.
Hi, thank you both so much. I'm still thinking about how Rich, you said how food sovereignty is also like sovereignty over our bodies, or like autonomy over our bodies. and how Markus was talking about like how we're all made of microbes, basically. It gave me this vision of how we're like all made of microbes and we need to take care of our bodies and things. And I really joined this weekend because I wanted to learn how to do this, because I know it's important, but I just need inspiration, I guess. And so I'm looking forward to that. But also thinking about Frida's comment about how fermentation takes time, and that kind of conflicts with our current society, you know, like our fast-paced lifestyles. And so I just wanted to hear from both of you what you wish people knew about the importance of fermentation for our health, and yeah, like how we're living and things like that. Like, what would you say to people to maybe inspire them to think more about that in their everyday life?
Actually, I would just say, just do it. So there's a very nice Nike slogan from, I don't know, 90s or so. And that's my credo. Just try it. It's very easy. You don't have to be afraid, and you can try it out. And yeah, the good thing is that like fermentation is a little similar to maybe also gardening or agriculture, but it's something that you can do in your living room or in your house, in your apartment. And what I like people to maybe get aware of is that it's actually really easy, and you just have to start doing it. It's with anything, like if you want to maybe run a marathon or so, you just have to start running at some point and not just skip it or so all the time. And you don't have to be afraid of microorganisms. They've been always around, and it's safe, and our bodies have a lot of microorganisms, and also on top of it, they have ways to cope with bad microorganisms, and it's not
people
scary.
don't understand that these microbes are good for us. We have this like we're socialized to think that they're bad, I guess. So yeah, the health aspect of it.
Yeah, maybe you have to say it's wrong. So it's not true that they're bad.
Nice.
Rich, do you want to add something briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you know, if you think about bread making, people don't think about the fact that they're taking they're taking yeast, you know, they don't even think about it. They take yeast, they bloom it, and then they start making things, you know, they start, massaging their bread. You know, of course you want to clean things, but ultimately you just leave it out, right? You leave it out and let it do its thing. And nobody says anything about, oh, I'm afraid of like what's going to happen to it. But if we talk about, you know, taking some cabbage, putting it in some salt, like if you haven't done it before and you're leaving it out, you're like, oh my God, I'm leaving it out. It's perspective and like understanding and like where, like what you've been sort of conditioned in terms of learning. I mean, you have fermented things in the past. I mean, you've made bread before, right? So you already have fermented, like, and then like you consume ferments all the time, like vinegars, like alcohol. If you like, you know, like sour candies, right? That's actually an aspergillus that produces that citric acid. Like these are things that are already happening that are everywhere. Like if you look in your like pantry of your, you know, the liquids that you have all these ferments. And if you think about,
I guess I'm thinking of like saving food. That's more than I'm thinking. Of course, it's everywhere and people need to understand that, but also the idea of saving food so that that's nutritious for you throughout the winter as well, like we were saying, and the importance of doing that for our health. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, so I would say that you should start with sauerkraut or kimchi because that pretty much covers your major vegetables that you could save. I mean, there's also like if you get an excess of fruits, there's always just vinegar, right? Because ultimately, all wine is just smashed up grapes that's left to ferment on its own, right? That's what natural wines are. So if you have fruit, all you need to do is potentially add some water, or like, you know, have a kombucha mother, or, you know, you just buy a live mother vinegar that has microbes in it. And all you have to do is just have a vehicle of sugar and liquid. And then you just basically sit and wait. So what I would do is just sort of start with very basic ferments. lacto fermentation of vegetables, vinegar fermentation. Obviously, if you want to make your own alcohol, you can also basically the in-between phase of vinegar is alcohol, right? Because acetobacter is what creates the alcohol. So you just leave you can veer it in a direction that you want, but just start to think about making alcohol and vinegar and lacto ferments, and those are things that you're going to cover whatever sort of the fresh produce that you have and understanding. And then there are things like if they go the wrong way, and they're too far, you can always just dry them or smoke them, or put them in your oven on a low oven to create these salts. So ultimately you'll understand these techniques that have been around for forever, since we've been preserving food on our own, that ultimately allow you to preserve food and not necessarily have to be fermented.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
thank you so much. I'm excited to learn all those over the next few days with you all.
Yeah, and Sandor's book is great because it has tons of examples of that. So
yeah, we will put together a list of book recommendations and articles and everything. We will share that. So one last question, and then we will wrap up and also talk a bit about tomorrow. Yes, Marius?
Jonas.
Yeah, and also there was a question by Jonas, but
Jonas
he put his hand down. Jonas, you wanna?
Yeah, I had a question for you both guys. Thanks, first of all, for this nice chat. For me as a chef, basically the hardest when I started with kochi fermentation was overcoming the fear of mold, because as a chef you are always get told in cooking school and everywhere, there's mold, throw it away, it's bad. And first of all, I had to learn how kochi looks when it starts growing. Then it was okay, it looks like now like this. I'm 99% sure it's kochi, so I can eat it. But every time when it changes somehow a tiny bit, for me it's oh my God, can I still eat it? Can I try it? It still smells good, but it doesn't look like it is. And then most of the time I'm unsure, and sadly sometimes not even try it. You would say, or did you ever had any problems with basically when something fermented a bit differently or other molds started growing on there? Did you still sometimes try the food when they still smell good? For me, it's kind of hard to separate bad and good in fermenting, because sometimes the flavors are so crazy already, or the smell is already is it still, yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, usually trusting your senses in terms of what it tells you. That's been part of our, that's innate in you, right? For survival, you smell something horrible, or you taste something bad, you don't want to continue to eat it. If you are assured that your incubator is clean and you're seeing the mold and the spores that are of that origin, I would not worry about it at all. It's when you start to see something that's completely different than what you expect, that's when you should not consume it. I think it's just, you're just going through the phase of getting comfortable with it. And I think everything that's telling you that you have to be sure that it's right is great. You want to do that. You always want to do that with fermentation. But if you start to see something that's different from what you're familiar with, ask somebody who knows. Send pictures, drag Marcus over and bring something to Marcus and say, hey, does this look okay? Those are the types of things that you start to learn. And then there are times when it's absolutely smells disgusting and it should be gross, making fish sauce. These things are sort of you sort of take it in levels, right? When you start to learn anything, right? You gotta learn how to walk before you can run, right? You don't want to start running right away because you're just gonna hurt yourself. So it's all of these things that you're doing that are the right things and how you've learned. And when you start to worry is when you should be worried because you don't know the right answer. And just to be able to ask the question or look up some information, that's a smart thing to do. And that's the key to anything in terms of what you make, right? Because like if you were making something that you already knew how to make, like a demi-glace, right? And it's like, and you left it in the refrigerator, now it smells sour, like you know that something went wrong, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like you already like have the conditions to be like have the conditioning to understand like what's right and what's wrong. It's just you're questioning yourself because you don't have the experience, and that's great. That's fine. That's a good stage to be at. We should always be at that stage of asking these questions, because when the trouble is when you don't ask the question, right? Then you get in trouble.
Yeah, what I often tell people that are maybe scared about microorganisms or ferments is like a three-way test, basically. So if it looks like how you expected, then it's good. Then if it smells like how you expected, it's better. And then you can even taste it. And if it tastes like how you expected, then it's probably the thing that you want. Like it's like if you have an apple, it looks like an apple, it smells like an apple, and it tastes like an apple, then it's probably an apple. And it's very simple. And just trust your intuition and learn how to interpret these things. And even if it's maybe on the edge, you can even still spit it out, and it's not a problem. And what I also would recommend is maybe like a lot of ferments are like an acquired taste. So what is maybe inedible for some is like maybe a delicacy somewhere else. It's like this rotten fish in Scandinavia, or it's natto from Japan, or it's maybe just cheese. And for some, it's really just impossible. But for others, it's maybe even a superfood. So natto is a superfood. But for some people, it's maybe not edible at all. So I think I have never had anything that is not edible in my ferments, and I've done really a lot of different things. But sometimes I didn't like it. So I sometimes threw things away not because it wasn't edible. So I make some little experiment maybe, but maybe it's also okay to say, okay, I think it's probably still edible, but it's just way too far away from my style. So you just leave it. And that's also part of maybe getting kind of maybe like a adult way with food or with your ferment.
Yeah, sometimes the problem with just of recipes, like I tried from your Kochi alchemy book, Rich, some yogurt ferments, and then they like look differently and smell differently than I expected. And then it's like really you try a bit and it's like, is this good? Is this not good? Did it work? Did it not work? Like then for me it's hard because you don't know how it looks, you don't know how it smells, and you don't know how it tastes. And that's the bit weird part about sometimes experimenting with it, because
Maybe
I would agree with Marcus in terms of like, it's a matter of like the experience of your palate too. I mean, but if you don't like it, you don't like it, and that's okay. Like,
we can also talk more about that tomorrow, where we will also taste stuff, and also I think Annette is going to be there again, so she's a culinary teacher, so maybe she can help us also. Yeah, we're a bit over time. So Marius, I don't know, is it a really, really short question or? Okay, then be really short. And also the answer is really short. Sorry.
It's just a short question to Rich. I'm still stuck on the peanut butter miso. I've read a lot about that. It's hard to ferment or to do misos with nuts, because sometimes it gets rancid with time because the enzymes start to break down the oils. And that's what I was wondering, because it's from 215, I think I read.
Yeah.
How did you do it, or which was
Yeah, I mean, like, so in my area, like New England, there's like there's a level of, you know, fairly, you can, I have a fairly cool basement. The other thing you can do is you can stick some in the refrigerator, but I mean, ultimately, if you want to avoid it, you can totally, you know, get defatted nuts. People do that as well. So, I mean, it's a matter of like how much risk versus how much return, and, you know, whether something goes bad or not. So yeah, it is something that happens and has happened to me before. But sometimes you just want to see where it goes.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that short answer. Great. So it was okay. Short enough. So thank you so much, both of you, for your time. That was a really interesting conversation. Thanks, Rich, and thanks, Markus.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited.
It was a pleasure.
What's Annette showing us?
Yeah. Annette, do you want to?
Das habe ich mal auf einer Ausstellung gesehen. Da hat ein Künstler eine Ausstellung zur Fermentation gemacht und wir haben uns auch auf Hocker gesetzt und haben gespürt, was blubbert, weil die Rohre da unter den Hockern waren. Und das war die Eintrittskarte, also nicht als Karte, sondern als Flasche. Wir haben die Flasche bekommen und sind durch die Ausstellung gegangen und zum Schluss waren sozusagen die beiden Dinger oben.
So it was an exhibition on fermentation, and Annette, you sent me the name, so we will share that with everybody afterwards. Great.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So I think now we're done. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you. And the rest of the group, if you have any questions for tomorrow for the organization, now would be the moment. We can also switch to German. And Rich and Markus, if you want, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. See you later, Markus.
Bye.
See you later, Carla.
Bye.
Frida. Take care.
Thank you.